This is the Almost Timely newsletter for the week of June 11th, 2023. Content authenticity statement: 100% of this newsletter was generated by me, the human. When I do use AI-generated content, I will prominently disclose it. What's on my mind this week? AI, creative writing, and fan fiction. Okay, let's talk exactly about how large language models work, especially in the context of creative writing. I was recently invited to join a group of fan fiction authors in protesting the use of AI to consume people's works without permission, and they had a lot of good questions that I want to try working through today in one big shot, or I guess in fan fiction terms, a big one shot. While today's issue will specifically be about fan fiction, everything we're going to talk about also applies to any kind of content on the internet, including your marketing content. We will put aside the can of worms that is the questionable legality of fan works, which is an ongoing legal debate. But in general, leveraging other people's intellectual property without permission means you can't really exert intellectual property rights of your own. That's one of the reasons why fan fiction authors, when they want to publish a story, end up redacting it and making it an original work. By the way, that's how you got 50 Shades of Grey. It was originally a Twilight fan fiction. You're welcome. Let's talk about how large language models work, because there's a lot of confusion about them. And once you understand them, you'll be able to make more informed decisions about how to use them and when not to. First, let's take a moment to clear up some terminology. A model is AI terminology for software. Microsoft Word, for example, is software, but it's written by humans for humans to use in the process of writing. A model is AI software, written by AI for AI to use in writing. What we think of as AI software, tools like ChatGPT, they're actually interfaces to AI models. They're not AI software themselves. So what are models? Well, they have these arcane names like GPT-4, Stable LM, Llama, Vicuna, MPT, etc. Why does this matter? Because different models are good at different tasks. Some models, like GPT-4, which is the most powerful model that powers the paid version of ChatGPT, are massive, massive models that are good at many things, but excellent at very few. Right? If you've ever tried to write, for example, some mature content, some mature fan fiction, you know that GPT-4 and the ChatGPT interfaces just won't let you. Right? It's like the Disney of writing tools. Anything remotely controversial simply isn't permitted. But that is not the only game in town. There are other tools like Bard and Bing, etc., that are very consumer-friendly also. And then there are specialized models and interfaces like GPT for All. I saw one the other day called Karen the Editor. It's a specially tuned model to just do editing without any rewriting. Very clever. For the rest of this piece, we'll be talking about the models themselves as opposed to their interfaces, because it's the models that do all the work, and the models are where controversies lay. First, let's talk about how these large language models are built. We're going to leave out tokenization and embeddings and all the fancy tech talk in favor of framing the explanations in terms of pizza. How do you make a good pizza? Right? There are a gazillion ways to make a pizza, right? But it's generally a flat, round dough with tomato sauce and cheese baked in an oven, right? Of course, there are variations like Alfredo sauce pizzas and dessert pizzas, but most of the time, when you say pizza, you're thinking of flat, round dough with tomato sauce, cheese, and some toppings, maybe. Now, suppose you wanted to teach an AI how to make pizza. How would you do it? You would find as many pizzas as you possibly could, go buy a huge amount of pizza and feed them to the AI to learn from all of these samples. Over time, with enough pizzas and enough time, a machine will learn that generally a pizza is flat and round dough with tomato sauce and cheese, right? It will also be severely overweight. You will have a lot of variations, like whether you should add sugar to the sauce or not, or oregano, or what kind of cheese to use. And you'll have big clusters of common variations, like Chicago deep dish versus New York City slices. And what is the machine doing? Taking all those pizzas that it ate, having a digestion, and then boiling them down, all those dining experiences, into recipes. This is a key point to understand about large language models. The source texts, which in our analogy is the pizzas, the source texts themselves are not inside large language models any more than a cookbook of pizza recipes is made of actual pizzas, right? When a company makes a large language model, what's being stored are the statistical representations of words and their relationships to each other. In essence, very fancy recipes, but not the original texts themselves, right? It's not it's not a big box of pizzas. It's recipes that it learned from eating all those pizzas. So if the source texts are not in large language models, then what is in there? Frequencies and statistical relationships of words to one another. For example, let's take this passage from a piece of fan fiction. The two women walked through the expansive lobby, decorated with the latest scientific achievements from around the company. Nearly lunchtime, the lobby's enormous glass walls had rotated open, allowing fresh air into the building and open-air dining at the ground floor employee cafe. Lena's stride skipped a step as a notification pinged on her smartwatch. She held it up, glanced quickly, then took Kara's hand and squeezed it 3 times. Kara nodded silently as they made their way to the elevator bank. Once the doors closed, Lena swiped her ID against the scanner, and the elevator began its descent into the basement levels of LuthorCorp. Is this exact text in a model like GPT-4? Nope, it is not. Well, what is? Well, first, it starts with something like this, right? The colored boxes here are how an AI identifies the pieces of text to start collecting data on, which is a process called tokenization, which leads to converting the text into something like this, right? This is a big pile of numbers. You can see it's no longer words, now it's numbers. And then this now becomes a series of math equations. Shorthand, basically a recipe, needed to replicate similar kinds of language to the source material. The pile of math equations, not even the math itself, but the pile of math equations is what the machine has been fed, right? It's distilled down. The machine knows from this small sample that we were talking about here, that the word Kara and the word Lena co-occur a lot, and they are related to each other statistically. But the source text isn't in the model, and critically, the model has absolutely no understanding of the text. AI can't read, right? They can only calculate probabilities. So back to our pizza analogy, once the model has a huge index of pizza recipes that define pizza, that it made from eating all those pizzas, AI companies then test it repeatedly, asking it to make different kinds of pizza in a process called supervised fine-tuning. When it makes a sphere of dough, model makers tell it, nope, that's not what a pizza is, right? That doesn't fit the model of what a pizza is. When it puts pineapple on pizza, well, model makers will argue with each other for hours in the office about whether that's pizza or not before someone will grudgingly allow it. And this process, the machines eventually end up rewriting their cookbooks, rewriting their recipes many times over as they receive feedback from humans that what they thought was good pizza was in fact not good pizza, right? You have the people arguing about pineapple, telling it that's not pizza, and you get the idea. Supervised fine-tuning helps large language models do less of the wrong things, like generate gibberish or problematic text, and more of the right things. This part of the process requires a ton of supervision and weeks, if not months, of fact-checking over and over again that the machine is doing things correctly or not. Finally, model makers for the most sophisticated models do what's called reinforcement learning with human feedback. Again, in pizza parlance, this would be like customers giving feedback on machine-generated pizzas about which pizza best matched what they asked for. Like, hey, I ordered anchovies and it gave me tuna. That's not quite right. And also, like, how did the pizza taste? Like, hey, this is the pizza I ordered, but it tastes like cardboard. Reinforcement learning with human feedback is a very time and person-intensive process, but eventually, for the biggest, most expensive, models, leads to pretty good pizzas. This is exactly how large language models work. They are fed with huge amounts of scraped data to learn what to do, boiling that text down into statistical probabilities that represent the text in the same way that that recipes represent the foods they're intended to make. Then the models are fine-tuned to make fewer mistakes, the recipes get corrected, and then they're given even more feedback from real-world usage. This is why copyright and sources are so difficult to untangle when it comes to large language models, because not only are the source texts not in the model, but the exact word-for-word probabilities are not in the model either due to the tuning process. In our pizza example, suppose as a joke, you served up a pizza made entirely out of paper, right? Gross. Supervised fine-tuning would end up disregarding many of the probabilities generated from that terrible pizza, because yuck. And thus what's in the final model would only incorporate fragments of the original probabilities, right? So in your recipe, it would be missing a lot of stuff because it wasn't very good, right? The supervised fine-tuning was, that's a terrible pizza. The same is true for source texts, right? Source texts that are in there that aren't very good, that generate bad output, that cause a machine to generate output, those probabilities are going to get knocked out. So it's not word for word, and it's not even the original math equations anymore. Now it's tuned version of these math equations. Okay. Now, a few folks have said, but a sentence I wrote came out of ChatGPT exactly. That shouldn't be possible if my writing's not in there, right? Well, there's two reasons this will happen. First, you wrote a sentence that's common enough that the machine would naturally generate it, right? If you write something like, and they lived happily ever after, well, that's not exactly original text, right? There's a very good chance any generic phrase you use will show up in a generated text because it's so common. If you write for a fandom that has a gigantic pool of text that's available, and when you use a machine to generate text, it's going to come up with a lot of generics tuned for that fandom because there was a lot of material on the way in that looked like it. Or second, you wrote a sentence that is so unique that when you prompted it for a completion, your prompt was so specific, the model only had a small number of probabilities to draw from, and that was a fragment of your source text, right? For example, if you wrote a prompt to generate a fan fiction about a rare pairing, and there were only 3 fics on the entire internet about that pairing, there's a good chance that any output the machine spits out for that are going to have recognizable patterns because there wasn't that much to learn from. Now, let's talk about AI and the ingestion of content, the scraping of content, particularly from fan fiction sites like Archive of Our Own. And we won't talk about the other ones because let's just not. Can AI companies scrape copyrighted texts without permission? Well, it depends. What does it depend on? The laws in your locality. For example, where I live in the USA, the law is not settled. We have not made that determination in law yet. In the EU, the law is leaning towards prohibiting the scraping of copyrighted contents without permission. Italy, I believe, is leading that charge. On the other side, Japan just ruled that AI scraping does not violate content in an attempt to seize a leadership position as a country favorable to AI development. Obviously, then this becomes a problem for jurisdictions, right? Japan is hoping to attract AI companies by allowing them to build models in Japan, along with the jobs needed to do so and the infrastructure needed to do so. And then those models can be used legally and safely anywhere in the world as long as they originate and run in Japan, right? So the law is not settled. Is it stealing, as some allege, to use copyrighted or original works to train an AI model? Let's go back to our pizza analogy. Is eating someone's pizza, using a pizza at someone's restaurant, and then going home and trying to write down what you think their recipe is that stealing, right? It's hard to say. Is it imitating? Absolutely. Is it plagiarism? It depends on how good the copy is, right? For example, I can try to paint the Mona Lisa, but it will be so bad. It will be a unique work of art, right? Bad, but unique, and no one's going to mistake it for the Mona Lisa. I can promise you that. Is it stealing? No, because theft deprives the owner of the use of their work, right? If I steal your car, you no longer have the use of it. If I made a copy of your car, that would be weird, but you would still have use of your car. Intellectual property rights infringement is not theft. It's a different category of law entirely, so we should set that aside. Now, let's talk about creativity and voice. Is the writing that AI spits out less creative? Well, it depends on 2 things, the model and the prompt. Really big models like GPT-4 are jacks of all trades, masters of none. They tend to create more generic sounding text because they have to be everything to everyone. A model like MPT Storywriter is tuned for writing long-form works. It's tuned for writing books, fiction and nonfiction, and thus it will spit out better quality fiction for the same prompt because it's purpose-built for that. Right? There are a gazillion models now that are purpose-built for very specific things, and you could even do that yourself if you wanted to. We'll talk about that in a second. The second factor is the prompt itself. Prompts are a form of programming language, except that instead of a formal language like Python or JavaScript, you're writing in English or Spanish or Japanese, but that also means that your prompts need to be as detailed as software, right? As creative briefs to get good results. Imagine asking a writer to write a piece on commission. You commission a writer to write a piece. And here's the catch. You're not allowed to contact them again until the work is done. How detailed and thorough would you need to be to get good output from that writer if you couldn't ask or answer their questions, right? That's how detailed you need to be when you're writing prompts for AI. So if you're not getting good results out of AI, it's probably the prompt that you're using or the model that you're using. Writing a prompt like, write a love story between Kara Danvers and Lena Luthor is going to get you a completely uncreative, boring story at best, because there's so little specificity that our large language models, which are just probability engines, will simply pick the highest probabilities to assemble a story, and that story will be boring. Right? If you submitted a 3-page prompt with a detailed outline, character descriptions, plot twists, style guides, writing examples, you're going to get a much, much better, more creative story. And by the way, get my free prompt guide. No forms to fill out, no strings attached, just a PDF. You can download that. Do you want a machine to sound exactly like you? And there might be a valid use case for that if you're a writer. Then you'll need to do something called fine-tuning, which is a very technical process where you take all your writing, prepare it in a format compatible with an existing model, and essentially tell the model to sound more like you. If prompt engineering is telling a model exactly how you want your pizza and it getting it right, to lesser or greater degrees, fine-tuning is like giving a model a bunch of your pizzas that you made and saying, make pizza exactly like this. It's much more precise because there are lots of little details and unique touches to our writing that are not in other people's writing, and it's hard for us to put those details into words to explain this is how exactly I write. But if I give samples, giving exact samples, it's a much more reliable way to capture the uniqueness of our voices. For now, the process of fine-tuning a model is fairly technical, but that will likely change over time as tools get more friendly and easier to use. Can machines be truly creative? 6 months ago, I would have said no, they can't, because they can only draw on what they've been trained on. However, there are 2 nuances here. First, large language models effectively have perfect memory. The more specific, precise, and focused your prompt is, the more likely it's going to have creative output that has not been seen before, because the probabilities are much smaller when you're more specific, right? Second, there is new research that just came out in the last month for tools to harness the mistakes made by AI as a form of brainstorming. Right? Sometimes AI tools, they just simply screw up. But researchers now argue that those screw-ups could have a potential as a force of creativity, a way for machines to be truly creative. And that is likely to be implemented in large language models going forward. Okay, so this was a lot to run through, but it answers many of the questions that my author friends raised about how AI is impacting creative writing. Here's the bottom line. AI is a tool. It's a very sophisticated tool that most people don't know the internal workings of, but I'd argue you also probably don't know the inner workings of the car you drive or the microwave you use either, right? As with all tools, AI is agnostic and amoral. It has no moral compass. It is not good or evil, and it can't do anything on its own. It has no free will, no agency, no license to operate independently of us. Thus, when we talk about the dangers of AI in creative writing and in fan fiction or in marketing, we're really talking about the dangers of how humans will wield the tool. You give a lumberjack a powerful tool like a chainsaw, and you're going to get powerful results from it. Give Jason Voorhees the same tool, and you'll get very different, equally powerful results, right? At the end of the day, it's the person using the tool that will use it for good or ill. And as we try to set down laws and rules and guidelines for AI, we have to focus on what people will do with the tool, because the tool doesn't do anything by itself. Okay. In other news this week, in case you missed it, besides reminding people that, hey, it is now 20 days left until Google Analytics 4 is the only operating version of Google Analytics. So if you have not switched over, now is the time. Right? And if you just don't know how to do it, or you just don't want to do it, hit reply, leave a comment, say, hey, I need help, and my company, Trust Insights, that's what we do. It will be, I will tell you this right now, we are so busy, it'll be reassuringly expensive because it's 20 days left, right? But if you just can't do it yourself, let us know. But besides all of that, the piece I did this week, I did a podcast episode with my partner, Katie Robert, on the 6 things that qualify someone as an expert. Give that a listen. It was a lot of fun. It's also on YouTube, so you can give it a watch too. But yeah, that was probably the better piece of content this week. For open jobs this week, we have senior data scientist at Rockstar Recruiting, AI data scientist at Travelers, AI founder of Climate Tech at Forum Ventures. I can't even pronounce that. It looks like Avamet Taipakat at Telia, Finland. So I don't speak Finnish, so I deeply apologize for murdering Finnish. Business intelligence developer at Cox Careers, data scientist at Deloitte, digital implementation analyst at Confidence Interval, growth marketing director at Cloudflare, head of digital marketing at Chewy, distinguished chair of global business at Babson College, reporting manager at Cox Careers, reporting solutions manager at wPromote, senior content manager at VMware, senior data engineer at Cox Careers, staff data scientist at Dropbox, and WebKit privacy enhancing technologies engineer at Apple. So lots of hiring going on. Another ad. If you have not already caught it, go catch my AI talk. It's at the very top of the newsletter that I just did in Chicago a couple of weeks ago. And if you want a version of this talk customized for your company's industry, I do custom talks. In fact, I'm doing one in a couple of weeks for a B2B company. And these talks are longer, the private ones, because we have more time, and then there's a lot of Q&A involved too. So if you want to bring me in to talk about AI to your company, there's a link to book a session. All right, in other news, we have guides to effective social media outsourcing. LinkedIn rolling out generative AI for ad creation in its content manager. We have our friends at Crackle PR and their agency framework for AI. Of course, it's like all AI all the time. Content creators and the future of the content economy, also using AI. Huge surprise. We have McKinsey saying about half of its employees using generative AI in some fashion, best practices for data science team collaboration, and in the news, in general stuff, we have a fun recipe for a sour cream from Ukraine, and SAG-AFTRA strike authorization and big changes at CNN. So lots and lots of crazy stuff going on there. Upcoming events. At the end of July, I will be at MACON, the Marketing AI Conference in Cleveland. So hope to see you there, followed by Content Jam in Chicago, then ISBM in Chicago, and then Content Marketing World in DC, all in the same week. So that's going to be a very busy week. If you're going to be at any of those events, come say hi. Also the Marketing Analytics and Data Science Conference, and then Marketing Process B2B Forum here in Boston. So that is the news for this week. Thank you for tuning in, for listening, watching, reading, however it is you consume the content. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your time, and I will talk to you next time. Take care. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.